Real quick, today we're talking about labor. Get super aerial, like big picture. By the end of today's conversation, what will our listeners understand?
Yeah, you're going to understand that labor control is a proactive measurement. It's not a matter of looking backwards at a report and going like, oh, I missed my mark. It has to be proactively controlled. So if you buy too much food, you can sell it tomorrow, right? If I use too much later, the clock is ticked and the money is gone, and nothing you can do about it. You can't bank it. You can't use it later. Clock ticks, money's gone, nothing you can do about it. So it has to be proactively controlled, and we have to set goals and targets, and then we have to have systems to help execute and delegate those goals. I guess those are the two major takeaways from what we're going to be teaching today.
This episode made possible by Restaurant Systems Pro. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, CEO of Restaurant Systems Pro, Fred Langley, back for part 3 of a 4-part workshop series on the must-have profit system in your restaurant. Today we're talking about labor, and this is going to be a heavy, visually loaded episode. So I highly recommend you head over to youtube.com/restaurantunstoppable and watch the video version of today's episode. And while you're there, subscribe, please, and thank you. Fred's going to be crushing some good stuff. Fred, I almost forgot to ask, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am feeling unstoppable.
Yeah, man. I'm stoked. This is going to be some really great stuff. So let's get into it. But before we do, let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
I mean, it's kind of building off of our cost of goods sold one, but the same thing applies to labor, and it's whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yep.
And mindset is so important, and believing that it's possible is so important. We talked about the belief in the 4-minute mile and how it eclipsed. It was 42 days later after Roger Bannister broke the tape on the 4-minute mile. John Landy did it, and it was the belief that it was possible made it to where one person after another did it. And so that's where I want people to be inspired by the most successful restaurateurs and Restaurant Systems Pro, that if it's possible for them, it's possible for you.
Yeah, 100%. It's will is, I think, the most underrated variable that will lead to your success in the restaurant industry. It's the willpower to show up and to do the work, the hard work. But having checklists and systems and processes in place definitely makes it easier. So real quick, today we're talking about labor. Get super aerial, like big picture. By the end of today's conversation, what will our listeners understand?
Yeah, you're going to understand that labor control is a proactive measurement. It's not a matter of looking backwards at a report and going like, oh, I missed my mark. It has to be proactively controlled. So if you buy too much food, you can sell it tomorrow, right? If I use too much later, the clock is ticked and the money is gone, and nothing you can do about it. You can't bank it. You can't use it later. Clock ticks, money's gone, nothing you can do about it. So it has to be proactively controlled, and we have to set goals and targets, and then we have to have systems to help execute and delegate those goals. I guess those are the two major takeaways from what we're going to be teaching today.
So what you're going to be teaching today was built out of years of developing systems and processes for the restaurant industry. It has now evolved today into a software as a service. What were you doing before the software? I'm curious. What did this look like?
So yeah, I'm going to show one of the systems today, and one of the systems was born out of my own struggle. If it is. And it's the reverse labor. I'm going to be teaching labor allotment, how we allocate labor. It's kind of like that profit first principle where you're allocating money and putting it in separate bank accounts. Well, we're allocating money for labor. And so we have a labor allotment that does that. And then we have to control labor within a shift. And one of the things that I had to deal with in 2008 was one of my fine dining restaurant was in Northern California in 2008 in wine country. And if anybody was in business around 2008, it was one of the worst years in the restaurant industry, especially in California, where the housing market collapsed. There was empty homes everywhere. And so if you have a fine dining restaurant and people are losing their home, they're not going out for a nice steak, right? They're still eating out. People will always eat out, which is why I love the business so much. People always have to eat. The restaurant business isn't going anywhere. It will change, it will morph, but it will never, ever, ever go away. Um, the the fine dining restaurant, we went and we lost 75% of our sales overnight. And so it was a all out battle. And it was really a really tough time in my life where I was on the road consulting, and then my own restaurants are struggling. In there, I did have a family Italian pizzeria that really carried us through that, but I had to make my fine dining restaurant survive. And if anybody can try to imagine what it would be like to lose 75% of your sales, it is struggle bus. It is like you have to be dialed into every penny, every single hour, every single thing. And so I had to be able to run multiple units and be on the road consulting and be coaching restaurants and running my restaurants. And so one of the delegation tools I'm going to be teaching today was born out of that hardship. And it is, one, it helps you survive the hard, but it also helps you really massively thrive when things are going well and throw a lot of money to the bottom line. And what it does is it allows you to delegate to an untrained workforce and actually make it to where labor is easier to understand within the moment. So you can use both your gut feeling for the business and the numbers to really drive really good in the moment live decision making as a shift is going on without spending all your time in the office. And that was born from pure necessity. And it's a time where my daughter died during that time. It was really kind of a dark time, but it was like this great thing was born from those difficult times.
Let's get into it.
Yeah. All right. So as we get into it, it's always a matter of prime costs. We're always going to talk about prime costs and where we're at. And no matter how you get there, the 45% gross margin, which is a 55 prime cost, is what we're looking for. Okay. And so in this case, we're looking at labor. If you're running a cost of goods sold, our labor is going to be at 25%. If we're running a 20% cost of goods sold, maybe a pizza restaurant, breakfast restaurant, then we can have 35%. A lot of times it's volumes that will get you there. So it takes more labor. You have extra delivery drivers and extra costs that's going into there. And labor might be higher, but cost of goods sold will be lower. A lot of times in California, you've got to run low cost of goods sold because of the high labor, which also leads to the higher prices on the menu and whatnot there. Or you might be like steakhouse, high cash contribution sort of place where it's $100 steak that costs $40 to put on the plate, but it's a high dollar, so the labor runs lower, right? So how you get there is going to be different, and it's going to have to be budgeted for each concept, but you have to believe it, right? And so that's where we get to our success quote or mantra that you started me with, is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So I have a quick story here. Trevor Mowad here, he says that you have to make the decision to live at your highest potential and become who you are meant to become. Okay, and so the story is he goes in, and there's this standardized test that has to happen, right? And and people will look at this and believe that the standardized test is going to be where you're at. And so what happens is he is a troublemaker. He is not doing well in school. He has, all this potential, but he just has not, he's an undisciplined person, right? And what ends up happening is it comes time for the SATs. He's not going to do it. He decides to go and do it. And he ends up doing incredible. The max score of an SAT is 1600. And the average score for people, just for reference, is about 1060. Okay. Well, Trevor goes and takes the test, and he ends up getting a 1480 on his SAT. And here's a guy who's not getting good grades. He's not attending school regularly, but he goes in, and all of a sudden, this test helps him look into himself and realize that there is something deeper in him, that he has more of an ability than he ever thought. And so he moves on from there. He didn't have the grade, so he graduates and attends community college and goes on to Wichita State and eventually gets a master's in the Ivy League. And he goes on and he becomes this successful magazine entrepreneur. So as he got disciplined, this inspired him to go and achieve greater things. He needed to have that belief in himself to go and do great things. Well, what happens is that 12 years later, he got a letter in the mail from uh, Princeton, New Jersey, where they're running the tests and scores on this. And he doesn't think anything about it. And the next day, his wife asks him, "Hey, are you going to open up this letter?" And so he opens it up. And as he opens it up, it turns out that the SAT board periodically they review their test taking procedures and policies. And he was one of 13 people that were sent the wrong SAT score. And what they
Man.
had done is they had accidentally doubled his score from a 740 to a 1480.
Oh my
Right.
Lord.
So it turns out that this score inspired this belief in himself that he was something better than he was, and because he started to believe in himself, he started to go out and do great things, to do things that high achievers do, right? But it turns out he scored 740 on the SAT, and he never really got that 1480, but that 1480 inspired in him the belief that he could do it. And so he did. He went out and did that and became a successful magazine entrepreneur and achieved great things in his life after learning that he was something more than he is. And so the lesson for the rest of us is that we have to know that the ability to do great things is in us. We just have to get up and do the things that it takes to be there. And so Eric and I were actually talking about this, where sometimes people, they're not going to do these systems, they're not going to do these little things to move the business because they don't really believe they're going to make that big of a difference there. But what I see is it makes massive difference. 5, 10, 15, 20 points. I teach that people can make 15, 20% profit. They can run a 55 price cost with 45% gross margin, which is what leads to a 15, 20, sometimes 25% profit margin. And if you're hearing this and you go like, that's not possible for me, you're right. If
Yeah.
you believe that,
I'm
so.
chomping at the bit, Fred.
Okay.
Let's get
All
into
right.
it.
Well, belief, I mean, and this is where I want to, we have these success stories of Jeremy Waller and Peter Scaflani and Ralph Lewis and all these people, and I put them up here so that you can believe that it's possible for you. Okay.
Yeah, and some of
And so
the prime costs we're looking at, if you go back, just for the people listening to this, we have 51% prime cost, 54%, 55%, 44% prime cost, 48% prime cost.
So yeah, I say that 55 possible, but I have people on here that are 51, 44, 48, and then there's many, many, many more stories beyond just the people that we're showing here of this happening. And so you got to believe it's possible, but you also got to do the work. You can't run a 4-minute mile without working out and progressing in your training, right? So the profit first mentality, where we take traditional accounting, sales minus expenses equals the bottom line profit. We want to turn that on its head, and we want to identify and budget where we need to be and allocate it. And so we have to look at what our expenses have to be and then use systems to run till we can delegate and make sure that we're hitting where we need to be. We talked about the Dave Ramsey method of the envelope system. For the purchase allotment, we also are going to allot our labor. We're going to say, how much money can you spend for us to be on budget? And so if you're over, you know it ahead of time. Here I'm showing proactive management versus reactive management. It's the biggest difference in Restaurant Systems Pro from any other system out there, but it's a difference in success. Once the clock ticks, the money's gone. There's nothing you can do about it. So you have to proactively control that beforehand. And so what I'm going to be showing you is how we're going to budget our money, and then we're going to proactively control the hours spent. Most of everybody here is going to go in and look at their POS system labor and see what it is in real time. They're going to look at their bookkeeping in the past to say, did I do well or not? And a lot of times you're not even going to know if you did well because you haven't properly done a payroll accruals to where you're seeing like, oh, I had 3 payrolls in this month for my biweekly. I know I'm over just because of that. And you just kind of shrug your shoulders and go, oh, I had 3 payrolls. That's why I'm over, instead of really looking at the numbers and knowing where you're at. So, but that's also after the fact. There's nothing that you can do about changing the past. You can only change the future. And so that's a really, really important part of this. Now, for those of you driving and listening or working out and listening to what we're doing, I have a budget up on the screen. And I'm showing 3 different months on a restaurant. And this is a barbecue restaurant that does millions in catering, right? So they do tons of weddings and parties over the summer. So what that means is they do a massive amount more sales in June than they do April, or November. And if I'm just going to take two of these months and compare them, in April, they had forecasted to do 165,000 in a month, okay? As opposed to June, they had budgeted to do $420,000 in sales in a month. Sometimes they'll do 3 or 4 weekend weddings on a weekend. And so if you're looking at this, what you'll see is there's fixed numbers across the board where they have $22,000 of management salaries in there. And that's a fixed number. And a fixed versus variable number is really, really, really important. So when we're looking at these and you have these all compared, in April, they have budgeted to do a 32.56% labor. In June, when they do $420,000 in sales, their budgeted labor is 19.53% labor. And you'll see is that they've done slightly better. There's economies of scale where as you get busier, you're going to be more efficient with it, right? You can only add so many people to your lines in your kitchen, so the busier you are, the more efficient you will be naturally, right? There's nothing a better efficiency driver than the printer going off in the kitchen or a section filling up for a server, right? It's just going to make you more efficient. We're less focused, less efficient during the slow times. You'll find in your own restaurant that you're going to make the most mistakes between 3 and 5. When you're busy and focused, you're going to be efficient and more dialed into your job. When you have a full section as a server or the printer's going off as a cook, you just get dialed in. So. But what we're seeing is that we have these different things. And this restaurant was making a mistake where they had been to one of our seminars. They learned what we did and they said, hey, we're going to budget our labor. And so what they were doing is they were budgeting 28% labor in April. And here the budget's saying 32% labor. But what was happening is they were just kind of shrugging their shoulders and going, well, we know the sales are here. I know I'm going to be over budget in April because it's just the way it is. And then they were budgeting 28% labor in June. And what that was doing was they were looking at their reports and going like, oh, we're way under labor for June. We're doing well. And where they really started to make the difference was when they budgeted and attacked labor to what it was supposed to be based on the month, and then actually budgeted 32%, 0.56 actually, in April, and then budgeted the 19.53% in June to give them clear targets. And so now if there's variances, now we can hone in on really being on target instead of just kind of shrugging our shoulders and saying, it's about right. But what's 1 or 2 points in anybody's restaurant? I don't care if you're doing $200,000 a year, 2 points is $4,000, and that's a lot of money. Yeah.
I want to make sure I understand. So in order to really do this well, you have to have that history, right?
Which is we have to have the history, but we also have to have the budget, which was the first step in this process that we did in day one. Yeah.
So workshop number 1 of the 4 must-have profit systems was budgeting. So this is a restaurant that has ebb and flows, peaks and valleys in terms of business. The big takeaway I'm getting from you is don't average every month and find what is our average labor cost, but really change your labor with the seasons and change your budget with the seasons. So when if you're doing 32% labor in April, but you're at 19% labor in June, I guess
I don't want it to accidentally be at 22% labor because I used a round number, right? When it should be 19.53. But I also don't want it to be accidentally 34 or 35% in April when, I want to be dialed in to my overall targets. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I guess in full transparency, I'm a little lost in the sense of, so you're using this data in the past to see what the peaks and valleys were, and you're saying, well, based off the history, we're going to be proactive and we're going to adjust our labor this month. And then, what happens when you do that?
So sometimes what happens with people is when we get started in a system is that we will just say, hey, we don't know exactly where you can be, so we're going to just do a little bit better than we did in the past. And we know we can start finding it. And then what happens is this process, instead of peeling the Band-Aid off and going from, and knocking 10 points off of labor overnight, is we'll just try to knock 1 point off labor this week. and then another point the next week. And then as we start to realize that we're going to provide even the same, sometimes actually better hospitality by having less people on staff. I just talked about how busyness creates more focus and attention. And so keeping people the right amount of busy. So we're going to get into dollars per labor hour, which will provide some clarity for you on that, Eric.
Yeah, there's a
But
human factors bell curve that I learned about when I was a commercial pilot, studying to be a commercial pilot, and it's always an area like people are optimal in periods of moderate stress.
right.
It's the picture this upside down U, a bell curve, and when things are lackadaisical, like you're just like not
Yep.
efficient. But once things start to get a little stressful, like you get alert, and then there's like this point where like it becomes overwhelm and it's
Yep.
it just like drastically drops off. But it's finding that sweet spot of like staying on your toes.
What up, unstoppable restaurant owners and operators? We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that Restaurant Unstoppable and Restaurant Systems Pro, we're taking our relationship to the next level. Beginning in July of 2024, Fred Langley, CEO of Restaurant Systems Pro, is making himself available once a week in Restaurant Unstoppable Network to answer all of your restaurant systems questions, whether it's be profit margins. He will look at your P&L. Bring your P&L. He will take a look at that. He will dissect it. He will help you find your profit, whether that be through budgeting, inventory management, costing recipe cards, labor, checklists, you name it. He is a master of restaurant systems, and he's making himself available to you. Fred Langley and Restaurant Systems Pro started as a consulting firm, and for over 16 years, they've been helping their clients increase their profit by 10% or more. What are you waiting for? Click the link below to join our Facebook group, Restaurant Unstoppable Network.
Yeah, and well, it's almost counterintuitive though in the restaurant industry because you're saying like, hey, I could use less labor, but bring my hospitality and quality of service up, right? And it is counterintuitive. You're like, well, see, it feels like the more people I throw at a problem, the better I'm going to solve that problem, right? But the reality is you want to have that right amount of focus in there. And so, it could be slightly different for each restaurant, but we start to dial in and look at your history and do slightly better. What will happen is this is where we get into qualitative and quantitative, where it's your gut feeling for the business and then what the business numbers tell you is we'll look at some history for like last week and go, hey, you looked really efficient on this last Saturday. How was that? Was everybody okay? Was everybody just busy enough? Or was the printers going crazy? There was a long wait out the door. It was complete chaos. Like, tell me a story about what that shift felt like. And when they go, oh, you're right, Fred, it was absolute chaos. And we go, okay, well, that's not the right efficiency we want to go for your restaurant. Or if they go, hey, it was actually pretty good. It was pretty smooth. It was a good night. Everybody was busy. People were high-fiving, there was great service, all these things. We go, okay, well, there's a target efficiency that we can start to push the envelope on in your store. And we can look at all the other days that aren't at that efficiencies and start scheduling at the efficiency where it's your sweet spot. So you start identifying your bell curve with that and then repeating it more in the future.
It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, if you guys want to check it out.
Nice.
It's interesting.
Nice. I don't know those details on it. I just know from, my application to the restaurant industry. So that's pretty cool. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
Sure. The other part of this, Eric, that you're looking at is look at those salaries at here. That's $22,000 a month every single month because they have people that are booking parties for June that are working in April and February and January. And so those are salaries that are fixed. And if you look at this, there's the biggest change in percentage here is that the management salaries in June are 5.26%, but in April they're 13.34%. And we kind of have a rule of thumb where we want management to be somewhere around 9 to 10%. And honestly, I included this November number in here because that's kind of the average sales that they did. If you look at the whole year at $224,000 in a month is the average. And you'll see that their management's right around that 10% mark that we want it to be because that's their average month. But between April and June, it's still averaging out to about 9% management labor. Actually 9, maybe closer to 10, it's like almost 19 to 18.5% between the two, right? And you average it out, it's going to be where you want it to be.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, and the other part of this is looking at dollars. Like at 32% labor, they're spending $54,000 in labor. At 19%, they're still spending $82,000 in labor, almost 30 grand more in labor, but it's the percentages are 11 points lower, right? Just because of those efficiencies that they're driving there.
Got it.
Okay? All right. So those are the budgets, those are targets. Well, now we have to get there, right? So we're going to look at some assumptions. We're going to look at an assumption of a $50,000 week, okay? And we want to show maximum coverage. We know that our weekly salaries in our store, in this example, are $3,000. We're going to say that our budget's 30% labor, and we're going to say that our average hourly wage is $7.45. So this obviously would be a tip credit state where it's $2.13 an hour for servers. If you've never heard of tip credit, maybe you're listening from California, Washington, or Oregon. Don't worry about it. It's just going to make you angry. Just know that your average hourly wage will be somewhere closer to $20 an hour instead of $7.45. But it's also going to cost way more for a burger in your state there. So those are some assumptions that we're working with. And so if you're listening in your car or working out, I'll keep repeating those. So we're going to look at how much money we're budgeted for total labor. We're going to look at how much money we are budgeted for labor minus our management, those fixed costs, because fixed and variable is a really important factor in budgeting for restaurants. We talked about that on day one, or session one. How many hours does each department get? This is really important because instead of looking at our labor and saying to our manager, like, hey, we need to hit a 19% labor, they go, 19% labor, what does that mean? They end up just looking in the past to see if they hit 19%. But what we're going to do is we're going to break it down and we're going to tell them how many hours they can schedule in each department that will get them to achieve the goal that they want. And so what we've done is we're going to take a big picture goal and break it down in a way that can be easily understood. So let's say somebody's writing a host schedule for the first time. If I tell them, oh, you have 75 hours to work with to do the host schedule for the week, that's a lot easier than, hey, you need to hit a 1.05% labor, right? Especially as a new manager, like I can understand scheduling 75 hours way easier than boss at 1.05. Well, how do I know if I'm at 1.05%? I don't even know what the average ticket is, what the sales are, but now that's where systems come in, is we make it to where we have these targets that are big picture, that are, upper management things, but we need to break them down into small bite-sized pieces that our team can execute on. And that's where you're able to start delegating better and getting your whole entire team running systems instead of it all relying on the manager or just the owner, or you working 80 hours a week to make sure things are done.
Got it.
And so it's a really, really important thing in breaking these things down in a way that can be digested and executed by an untrained workforce. Let's be honest here. You have people that sometimes their restaurant is their first job, their first step in the workforce. And they have a lot to learn. They're very smart. I'm not saying that young people are dumb. I'm not saying that at all, because in fact, I don't like it when people say young people are dumb, because I know some incredible, great young people that are extremely smart and doing great things. And we don't want to let some of the bad apples spoil the whole bunch when it comes to judging generations. I'm sure, the generations before us did that. I want to avoid that and know that we have very capable young people. Yeah.
Just real quick, I want to go through like the order of operation, the exercise. First, you start with how much money we budget for total labor. Then you ask yourself, how much money do we budget for labor-less management? What's this labor?
For how much we're budgeting for labor less management? Okay. So we're going to say we have a total pile of money. So exactly. So if we're looking at this exercise, it's 50,000 a week. We have a 30% target, right? So 50,000 times 30% means that we have $15,000 total for labor. Well, management salaries are 3,000, so 15,000 minus the 3,000 in fixed numbers gives us 12,000 to work with.
So now you have 12,000 to work with. The next question to ask yourself is, how many hours can we schedule?
Yes.
That $12,000 budget.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then so how do you answer that question? How many hours can we schedule with that?
Well, we've determined that our average hourly wage is $7.45, and so what that does is it tells us that we have $7.45. So we're going to go through this step by step.
So you're going to divide
The
basically
12,000 by
12,000 by
745. Yeah.
745 to get a
Yep.
budget for hours.
That gives you a pile of hours.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you say, okay, how many hours does each department get? So now you divide this budget of hours into departments.
Yep. And we use
then,
our past to predict our future as well. Yeah.
Got it. And then based off the average wage by department, what are the labor costs, so now you go beyond and you say, okay, with this budget, what is our average wage in each of these departments? And then that gives you a cost, that gives you basically an hour budget for each department.
Yes, which is way easier to delegate and understand.
All right, cool. Let's keep going.
All right, so now we go through these and we go, here's the equation all laid out. We just kind of verbally set it there, so we're going to go through the numbers there, okay? So we have a $50,000 a week, and we multiply that by 30%, and that gives us $15,000 of total labor. We've determined that our salaries are $3,000, and so now we have $12,000 to work with.
Yep.
Okay. If you're looking from home, there's a very worried lady, a picture of a lady with all kinds of big equations in the background, to demonstrate how sometimes people feel looking at this stuff too. But it's a very necessary evil, I shouldn't say evil, but a very necessary part of running a business is knowing your numbers. So we're going to go through it whether you like it or not on this here. So $15,000 we have to work with minus the $3,000 in salaries gives us $12,000 in variable labor to work with. Okay.
Got it.
We take that $12,000 and we divide it by the average wage for your company. And so in this case, the $12,000 divided by $7.45 gives us 1,610.7 hours to work with.
Got it.
Now, I mentioned that we use our past to predict our future. And so what we do is we look at how many hours each department gets. And so what we do is we look at the history, and the history will tell us what mix the hours work. So if servers use 45.6% of all hours last week, we're going to automatically allocate 45.6% of our budgeted hours to this week, right? So we do this every week. The system actually auto calculates this every week for our system. I have a spreadsheet that I'm going to give you so that people can do this in the spreadsheet and know that the software makes it easier, but we're going to give you all of these formulas in a spreadsheet that you can fill in and handle this yourself. This is we're not gatekeeping here on this.
What's the name of that spreadsheet?
It's called the labor allotment spreadsheet.
Got it.
And so here you're saying, hey, bartenders used 14.8% last week, so they get 14.8% times the new budget hours, and now I get 232.1. We mentioned host hours. In this scenario, host hours total, they get 102.2 hours, and that's how they're going to be on budget, right? And so we go through that and we look at like, okay, if we budget in those hours, we know the average hourly wage, we can start to allocate what those percentages are. So we take the average hourly wage by department and start multiplying that out, and it gives us our total labor percentage. And it will let us know where we have budget. You can see as we multiply that out, there's rounding and things going on. Doing this with a calculator, all those wages add up to $11,995.41. It's only $4 off of our budget delta. Now what we've done is we've taken this big picture budget target and broken it down into how many hours people in different departments. Now I can go to my chef and say, hey, you get 405 cook hours and 70 dish hours. That's all you get. And then what happens is they go write their schedules and they try to make it work. And then there's negotiation, and then they look deeper and they have this goal. When you give somebody a goal to go for, they're way more likely to achieve it. Instead of just like, hey, most of the time schedules are written by like, hey, this is what I feel I need. And especially in the kitchen, they're always put way more than they actually need. But when you start looking at the numbers and efficiencies and what you actually need to do to survive, it's really, really, really important. And so this is where it gets into full-time equivalents on how many you can do. It kind of lets you know how many employees you should have. A lot of times with full-time equivalents, you could say a server is going to work 5 shifts, but a cook is going to work, it could be that we want them to get 40 hours in a week. So we look at those, like if you look at the 405.3 divided by 40, it's going to give me 10.1 hours. 10.1 employees, excuse me, at 40 hours a week, I get 10.1 full-time equivalents. I could have 2 employees though that work 20 hours a week that equal 1 full-time equivalent, right? the servers, if I take the 733.95, it's, divided by the, 20 hours a week maybe, or 25 hours a
Can
week.
you go back to that full-time equivalent? I've never heard that expression. Are you talking about basically that salary?
Yeah, it's a manufacturing term, and it's how many. It's kind of a way of determining how many employees you need, how many full-time equivalent employees you need to fill your schedule. This is really helpful for somebody that's opening a restaurant for the first time. They don't know what they need, and it starts to look like, oh man, I need 40.3, and you start looking at your schedule and saying, well, Josie is only part-time, so she's half of a full-time equivalent, and Stacy is full-time, so she's one full-time equivalent on there. And you start looking at that in this restaurant example, we need 40.3 full-time equivalent employees, so we essentially need 41 full-time employees to fill the schedule for this restaurant. I need 10 cooks, 2 dishwashers, maybe 2 bussers, 2.5 hosts, right, part-time, 6 bartenders, and 18 servers is what this is telling me.
Okay.
To staff my restaurant.
How did you get to that number again? Like,
if I look at the cooks, there's 405.3 hours allocated. If we're saying that full time is 40 hours, then it's going to be 10 employees are going to get 40 hours. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. On there. Now, here is Steve Brown. This, I got to update this slide because he actually made $1.5 million. He started in 2008 with us, and he only made a couple hundred. Now, I say only. He only made a couple $100,000 a year, which is a good salary, right? He's making good money. There, I think he actually got up to 300 something thousand there. But that's a big difference in making over $1 million. In fact, I have a picture of it. I don't have it on here, but he actually achieved it to where he had $1 million in his operating account at the end of the year, and he had the opportunity to write himself $1 million check. His CPA told him, he's like, hey, that's not the right way to distribute this money. You're going to end up paying a little bit more taxes.
I don't care. I'm doing it.
I don't care. I'm writing myself $1 million check. It's about the goals and a mindset and achieving those goals. And so he wrote himself, and I have a picture of that $1 million check that he wrote himself. From one restaurant, so it's really
was a big part of that additional, like going from 300,000 to $1 million, 700,000 in profit. Was that just from how much of that came from labor?
So it was a good chunk of it in labor. Actually, I'm going to show you the proactive tools on it. A lot of it came from cost of goods sold. It's a good mix of it. A lot of it came from efficiencies. A lot of it came from growing sales, right? So it's always a mix of all those things. What I'm going to show you is he started doing, he started with this in 2008, and he started to make some progression, and he went from making a few $100,000 a year to making $500,000 or $600,000 a year, and doing all these things and kind of putting them together. We launched our software in 2011. By 2013, I told Steve, I go, you should be making $1 million every year out of your restaurant. And so he hired me to go in and consult. And so here in the spreadsheets, this is a schedule variance spreadsheet here, where it'll look like, and you can see this is 2013, January 7th, 2013. A schedule was written, and you can see that he has the budgeted wages that comes from the labor allotment that I just taught you. And then what we took was the actual schedules that were written and compared them side by side. This is all automated today, but we were creating spreadsheets and stuff and looking at this proactively. So this is basically a variance report for a week in the future so that we could control it, right? So, and you can see here that he was losing, 460, which is only $26,000 a year. So he was actually pretty good on labor. But as he went through, he went from $425. So in a matter of 3 weeks, he closed the gap to where he was only $8 net over budget in 3 weeks as you look at this report. So this is the report for 1/21/2013. And proactively looking at this, right? So then as you start to go through that, now he's $320. They start finding more. $320 under budget. $580. You can see there's no red on this report at all. Every single department. So basically over the course of about 4 or 5 weeks, he went from he made $1,000 a week swing. So that's $52,000 a year on there. And then as you start to go, we started to find now we're at $1,500 a week there. It's almost $1,000 under budget. As he goes, almost $1,000 under budget, $1,300 under budget. So now we're getting to where he found about, after already doing this for 5 years, he found another almost 100 grand. Almost 100 grand in labor here. Yeah, about 100 grand as you look at two. So now we're getting 2 months later. So this isn't also an overnight magic pill, right? He had to work the system, realize efficiencies, get it. So as we progress through the weeks, you're seeing that he starts to make the difference. Now all this is automated in Restaurant Systems Pro, where you write your schedules in there too. We're actually working with some scheduling platform integrations where people can stay in their scheduling platforms that they're in and
Are we
push
allowed to talk about that yet?
not ready to talk about it, but
Um,
really excited. Yeah, really excited.
um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, hearing this, it's like, it's kind of like back to like, you know, the cost of goods conversation we had when you really start tracking where are my products going, where are my goods, how are the pennies moving. With labor, once you really start looking at like where are our resources going to pay these individuals, what department are they going to, okay, now that we understand what the actual reality, we can start budgeting and really seeing if we can be more efficient with the time and resources of human labor. When do we start getting to the point where we can say, okay, now that we like at some point you start looking at the numbers and you start saying, how can I improve daily systems and processes to
Yeah.
eliminate labor expenses?
Yeah, so that's where our checklist. So that's where actually next week, where we're talking about training and checklists and follow up to that training, right?
Okay.
As a pilot, you know those things well. You never would fly a plane without the checklist, right? There's lives on the line, right?
Right.
But sometimes people will think, well, I'm just a cook. I don't need a checklist. That's
Right.
kind of like saying, like, I only get a 740 on my SAT. I don't need to do the little things to be excellent. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Where
Right?
are we in today's lesson? Are we towards the end? Is there more?
No, so I actually have a couple of steps. I do want to get into the reverse labor. I'm going to skip this story. This is a mindset story that I'll tell one of these days here. But this is where we start that schedule variance report allows you to delegate rather than abdicate responsibility. Okay. That's a really, really important. So I'm going to go over one more system today that takes, and it's called the reverse labor system. And this is the system that I invented in where my life was complete hell in my restaurant, where we lost 75% of our sales due to the economy, and people were just not going to fine dining. I actually ended up selling that restaurant, and in selling the restaurant, it was kind of I'm going to say a typical arrogant chef. I'm a chef, so if I offended anybody, chefs are known to be arrogant and full of confidence. And basically, when I sold the restaurant, I said, "Hey, look I have all these systems that have helped us survive the last 3 years, and these systems have really carried us through. And I'm going to give you all these systems with the sale of the restaurant. You can run them. You can you can apply them." And he was like, I don't need your systems, basically. I was like, okay, God bless you. They only lasted 2 months. And that does not make me happy. It makes my heart break for them, because after I had survived 3 years in a difficult situation, and then finally was like, find somebody that wanted to buy the restaurant, while I was growing my other restaurant brands and the more casual concepts, which is actually where you just before our call predicted where most of restaurants are going, is a more casual delivery, all those things.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but let's bookshelf.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, but what ended up happening was they just blew through all their money in the first 2 months. No systems, no control on it, and they didn't last where we lasted 3 years. While I was running other restaurants, while I was on the road consulting, they only lasted 2 months, which is a very, very short time to run through. But to run a good business, you need qualitative skills, and we've talked about that. And qualitative skills are your gut feeling for it. So labor is a big part of having a gut feeling too. Also, I feel like where the qualitative skills comes in was we were talking about cost of goods sold in session 2 on this. It's a lot less emotional to write a smaller check to Cisco than it is to cut your employees' hours, right? And so it takes really big shoulders and understanding that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, right? If we're going to look at Star Wars, right? Isn't that the directive? Not Star Wars, Star Trek, sorry.
Got it. So the 3 keys to successful management, the first one is qualitative skills.
Qualitative skills. You have to have a good gut feeling for the business. You got to know that Susie can handle a big section while Judy she's going to get overwhelmed and can't handle handle it. When Tom is like the best salesman there, and I got to have him on Friday night, right? I got to know my cooks. I got to know who can handle, I got this person, they can be more efficient because they can work salad and saute at the same time. I got to
Those are
know
like leadership skills, like emotional intelligence and stuff.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I also got to know, like, hey, I only have so many hours to work with. So I have to take care of my best employees, my most loyal employees first. And then we kind of go down from there. So I got to make sure that Jose gets his hours, or I'm going to be left, with Jose trying to go find another job. Right. And so I got to make good decisions on where I'm going to cut these hours. The numbers will tell you how many hours, but now you got to use your gut feeling for how I allocate and use those hours. It's a really, really important part of the process that it's difficult for us to inform you without knowing your business, right?
Got it.
So the other thing is knowing your numbers, knowing the quantitative skills there. Okay, you got to know your numbers. You got to know the targets, or you're not going to ever be able to delegate. If you notice, like that schedule variance report allows you to unload scheduling on your entire staff because you're going to know if they're blowing your bank account before it happens, right? By looking at that schedule variance report and budgeting ahead of time. Because like I said, once the clock ticks, that money's gone. So you got to proactively control that. And you got to have good numbers and targets for your team to go after if you're going to properly delegate versus abdication. Abdication, if you read the E-Myth, just says, hey, I don't want to deal with this. Please deal with it. I don't like writing schedules. I don't like doing this part of management. Please take care of it, right? When delegation means, hey, you're going to take care of management. Here's the parameters you have to work on. Here's how I'm going to train you. Here's the follow-up to make sure you're doing your job. It's a big difference, delegation versus abdication. It's a very, very important part of good management there.
What up, unstoppable restaurant owners and operators? We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that Restaurant Unstoppable and Restaurant Systems Pro, we're taking our relationship to the next level. Beginning in July of 2024, Fred Langley, CEO of Restaurant Systems Pro, is making himself available once a week in Restaurant Unstoppable Network to answer all of your restaurant systems questions, whether it's the profit margins. He will look at your P&L. Bring your P&L. He will take a look at that. He will dissect it. He will help you find your profit, whether that be through budgeting, inventory management, costing recipe cards, labor, checklists, you name it. He is a master on restaurant systems, and he's making himself available to you. Fred Langley and Restaurant Systems Pro started as a consulting firm, and for over 16 years, they've been helping their clients increase their profit by 10% or more. What are you waiting for? Click the link below to join our Facebook group, Restaurant Unstoppable Network.
Then we have solid training. We have to train our people. We have to give them good systems to drive efficiencies. We're gonna part of we went through Steve Brown's progression, and you actually nailed it and said it. Like, it's not just knowing the numbers, it's better training, better organization, better mise en place, better checklists to prepare people for a shift. You're going to find that the magic in running a good shift is all in the preparation and being ready for a shift. If I'm running to the walk-in to cut steaks on the fly, I'm going to be over portioning, and there's going to be ticket times going up and that disorganization. But if I have a good system for mise en place that lets me know where I stand, and if I'm actually ready with good measuring, then I'm going to be able to delegate that to new employees better, and I'm going to be more efficient. So we're going to have good goals, trainable results, and take personalities out of the equation. If you're a pilot going through a checklist, it has nothing to do with their personality. It has everything to do with these are the things that have to happen before you take off on the plane, right?
So the three keys to successful management are qualitative skills, quantitative skills, and solid training. And systems provide quantifiable goals, trainable results, and take personalities out of it. So, I have things I want to discuss. I want to make sure we get through the slides, and I want you to wrap up before I get ahead of you. So
let me wrap it up, because this is the last system I'm going to show for today. And it's cutting or phasing with a purpose, right? And it takes experience and gut to cut, but the numbers have to back it up. And so many people are only phasing or cutting based on their feeling. And what that means is, as a manager, you can never go home early. You always have to stay to make sure that people are going home at the right time. If I don't leave, then everybody's going to be standing around talking in server alley, and nobody's going to be efficient or any of those things. And so I have to work 80 to 100 hours a week. But instead, We need to proactively manage to our targets. And the big part of this reverse labor system is understanding that your percentages are going to vary throughout the day. So if we're going off of percentages, we are already messing up, because if you go into your Toast POS system, whatever POS system that you're using, and you go in the morning, your labor could be 100% because you've only done one to-go order, but yet people have been working since 8 a.m. and you've done one to-go order at 11, right? And so your labor could be 150%. And maybe if you haven't done any sales at all, it's infinity, right? You have no target for where you're at. But then at 7 o'clock at night, when you're at your peak sales, my percentage might be 10%, when my overall goal for the day is 20%. But what's going to happen is the sales are going to stop, and we have to clean up and shut down. And so all this labor is going to happen as the sales stop at the end of the day. And so there is no point in the day that you can go into your POS system and look at your labor percentage and know if you're on track or not. You just can't know. And so you already are used to watching sales. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn these systems upside down. And instead of looking at percentages as our goals, we're going to look at sales as our goals. And so what we do is, this is proprietary, and we call it the reverse labor system. And this has saved so much labor and made it so easy to delegate over the years. And we're the only people that teach it and do it that I've ever seen. In fact, I personally invented it during 2008 when I was making my restaurant survive. And what it does is it turns the labor allotment that we just talked about on its head and reverses it. The labor allotment said, here's your sales, there's our budget, here's how much labor you can schedule, okay? The reverse labor system says, here's the labor that you've scheduled, that you've actually scheduled, connect that to your budget, and it tells me how much sales I need to do, right? So now we look at our labor and say, this is the sales that we need to do to be on budget. And now what happens is you're managing your day with a sales goal in mind. And so as the day progresses, you will know if you're on target with your sales goal, right? And so this is where, as we run through it, we know the dollars in our labor schedule. So in this case, we're looking at 24 cook hours at $14 an hour, and one person at $16 an hour, 8 dishwasher hours at $12 an hour, and this is in one day, right? So what that does is it gives us a $448 in scheduled back of house labor. We know that, right? In the front of house, 8 bartender hours at $10 an hour, 5 host hours at $12 an hour, and 18 server hours at $10 an hour for the day, giving me $320 in scheduled front of house. And the labor allotment says that we have a 22% variable labor target. Okay, so when we look at that, the necessary sales to meet budget is our missing variable, right? And so when we look at that, we go labor divided by what we need to do in sales is going to equal our budget, right? So we know our labor, we don't know our necessary sales, but we do know our budgets. So 2 of the 3 things we do know. So if we do a little bit of math, we take our $448 in the back of the house and $320 in the front of house, divided by the unknown, which is the sales we need to do to be successful, right, equals our budget of 22%, right? So if we cross multiply from, I'm going to go through that quickly. If we cross multiply from 6th grade algebra, we know that our necessary sales have to be $3,490.91. So now instead of managing to 22% labor through the day, I say, hey, I need to do $3,400 today to be on budget. And now as the day goes by, I can know if I'm on pace to do $3,400 in sales to be on target. If I'm not, that's when I know I need to cut. Now I don't need to be in the office. If I go in the POS system, I might be running 100% labor at 11 o'clock and 10% labor at 7 o'clock, and I have no idea if I'm on track. So what we do is we manage to this necessary sales number. And so what it does, and it tells me based on we have our forecasted sales, necessary sales, is it will our systems tell you what your necessary sales are to be able to manage that. And that is such an important part of running good numbers there. Okay, so it is really good. That's where you can start getting into dollars per labor hour, and you can dive deeper into that too. But the gist is the labor allotment system, and then using the labor allotment system to do the reverse of it and look at the necessary sales for a shift instead of looking at percentages.
Yeah. And I just love that mindset of having targets for sales. And it starts
Yeah.
like now that you have like when you take all these
Growth
things,
mindset. Yeah.
yeah, when you take all these daily liabilities, these responsibilities, these things you have to do every day, when that's all in your head, but you take it out of your head and you put it into a system or daily checklists and these things, now it's just like you're just going through the motions. It frees up the mental bandwidth to then say, hey, our target is X. We got to do whatever it is, $50,000 this week in sales. And then you start really saying, okay, well, how that's like only after you've done everything, you've worked on your business, you have these systems, you start to switch to say, how do we work on our business to now like start, okay, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's improving the upselling, maybe like, and this is like once you get this stuff locked in and out of your brain to all the management side and you start delegating it, that frees you up to start hitting sales goals. And I just think that's so powerful. And the other thing too, listening to you talk today, I had recently Nick Yee on the podcast, and Nick is the operations manager and partner at the Bean Group. I previously had his brother Edison Yee on the show, and we got to talking about they have this. I started telling you about it, I think, in a previous episode. They have a concept, something Prince, but it's a German concept. They do tons of schnitzel, and they save $26,000 a year in labor costs by purchasing a machine that can pound out meat. Better than a human could ever do on their own. And I think the cool thing is when you start really looking at these numbers, and then you get your allotments, you get your hours, your budgeted hours, and you start looking and you start saying, and you start sharing this information with your team, and you say, how can we do it better? Like how can we shave a percent off back of house budget? And like now you get everybody looking at it, and they're like, what things like what? How can we improve these systems to be more efficient and to do more with less? Automation. Maybe it's technology. Maybe it's like a machinery, robotic, or like automation, like tool, like a pounder. Like, and then you just start. It just starts compounding. You're using profit first, and you have this profit account, and that profit's only used for buying assets. So now you have like this fat overflowing budget like account, or not budget, profit account that you can use to invest in assets to streamline process. And it just starts to like spill over on itself. I don't know. I get really excited about that. I did want to. It all starts with qualitative skills, right? If you have to have the qualitative skills to do more with you have to have quantitative skills. Excuse me. In order to do more with your qualitative skills, the qualitative skills will help you, give you the data to make these decisions that can really just 10x the efficiencies of your business.
Both of them by themselves don't help you. Only knowing your numbers doesn't help you, and only having a gut feeling doesn't help you. You have to put them together to make really good decisions.
But when you can pull these qualitative skills by getting those quantitative skills like locked in, now you can use those qualitative skills to pull your team into the process. And then that's where this idea of like brainstorming and 10x potential energy and power through just like literally connecting your brains to solve a problem. It's just super powerful stuff.
We give you the framework to do that.
I did want to talk to you too. I mean, as we move into the future, yesterday or like on Tuesday we covered cost of goods. Today we're covering labor. Obviously, costs of goods are skyrocketing right now. Labor is skyrocketing right now. What are you seeing in terms of your clients and the business models that are really thriving right now? Like what is the future in terms of like how do we be better entrepreneurs? And just I feel like we're guilty just like taking like this like cookie cutter like restaurant concept, like the full service model or the fine dining model where we have servers and tables and like a kitchen, and we just have all this like labor expense. It's just like, what are the smarter operators doing today to like really like to get their cost of goods and labor as low as possible?
I mean, let's talk about Robert St. John for a second, right? Because he's got concepts all around. He's got a breakfast concept, he's got a burger concept, and he's got a upscale casual, dining concept. Now
He's got a bakery counter service too.
he's got a bakery. He's run the gambit on all of them. And what he's identified is his most scalable operations is going to be Ed's, and that's where it's walk up to the counter, order, and they.
What is Ed's?
Ed's Burgers. Ed's Burgers. So it's a burger joint, and it's quick service. You go up there too. Now, for him, he's identified that as being scalable. It doesn't make more money than his upscale casual place, but the percentages are better, right? So it's running sub 50 prime costs on there. He's got his other one that's doing 6 million running a 55 prime cost, so it's throwing more cash to the bottom line because it does 6 million in sales, right? So it's not necessarily that one's better than the other. The Ed's is definitely more scalable. It's easier to train. It's easier entry point, easier to find the real estate to get it done, easier to duplicate the concept. So those are some things that make it more advantageous to scale. Now, he's also working with economies of scale by using the bakery to supply Ed's burger buns and using his own. Yep. And so he's dialing that in, but also his Midtowner concept, the breakfast joint, it runs a low prime cost. That is possibly another one that he could scale as well.
Yeah. So I think where I'm getting, I think we're kind of committed. We're married to like you see for the longest time, through like there was an overwhelming amount of full service restaurants. Then you saw quick service, got smart, and then you had fast casual, and that, I just think that. I look at like Bar Taco and what they're doing, and this idea of a hybrid server, which is really like a manager on staff who's also a server. They have like a couple of these people that just work zones, and so you have that front of house hospitality, high touch, but you're leveraging technology to streamline process and to remove labor costs. In the back of house, it's like using machinery to increase throughput and stuff like that. I just think you're going to see more and more people getting away from full service operations and relying more on maybe QR codes or counter service. Are you seeing this trend too? And also the other obvious one in terms of cost.
It's a combination. I know that with our clients, like COVID hit and there was this adjustment that had to happen and prime costs went up and inflation happened and all those things. But honestly, today my clients are adjusting. They've doubled down back on the systems that they're running, and they're running good numbers again, despite it all. This is where you also have to factor in that qualitative stuff. If you just look at the numbers, then maybe those types of concepts are there. But a lot of times people entering the restaurant business, it's people full of passion, wanting to serve people, wanting to execute on something that they love. And so those are factors that enter into the equation as well. It's not just a matter of like business wise looking at, you do need to look at your community and your standards. And if what you're passionate about aligns with your community, then you should take action on that. I don't think the full service restaurant is dying. People still look at it as entertainment and going out and enjoying.
I don't think full service and fine dining are going anywhere. I just think you're going to see them taking up a much smaller percentage of the market. And I think that the market's going to stay the same size. You're just going to see operators get smarter and say, listen, only 1% of my consumer or the consumer base can afford fine dining. But you have so many people trying to put out fine dining quality food and that level of hospitality and service. It's just like, why don't we just have more casual, like at the end of the day, people just don't want to cook. They want to be able to go to an atmosphere and have, to be seen by others and by staff. And we're just looking for convenience. I think we have to find that middle ground of like, okay, where can we meet the consumer where they're at, where it also is beneficial for us. And I think you're just going to see a way smaller portion of the marketplace being taken up by fine dining and casual dining. You're going to see way more QSR, fast casual, and casual counter service situations where where it's like casual dining, like atmosphere, but you're relying more on technology and counter service to get the food. And then there's people floating around making sure that you're all set to cut back on labor costs. And that's going to take up a bigger segment of the market. And then also you have delivery, ghost kitchens. That's going to start chewing into that total market share too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a little bit of that. I do see ghost kitchens in decline. for sure that people are just owning their brands. They're out there a little bit. I mean, even I think the Beast Burger is kind of falling off and dying. The whole Mr. Beast Ghost Kitchen, where it's all the chains were producing this, and it was only for delivery, no storefronts. And
it was a marketing first mentality. You know, it was all about just using influence and marketing to run a cultural business, and that's backwards. Marketing is the last. Not everybody agrees with this. I would say marketing is the last thing on the totem pole. Get everything in your house in order, and if you
agree with that,
yeah, people will come back if you're doing a good job.
100%.
Yeah. So anyway,
100%.
this has been a lot of fun. We have one more workshop. Are we wrapped up here today?
Yeah, we're wrapped up today. Come back, and we're going to be talking about training and operational systems.
Yes, I love that. I think
efficiencies.
That, in my mind, training is marketing. In my mind, because like that is the experience that you're creating. That's four walls marketing in my mind. All right, cool. So again, this was a very heavy visual episode. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com head over to youtube.com/restaurantunstoppable to watch the video portion of this. This was a live recording. We had people joining us live that are going to answer their questions. If you want to join future workshops, head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/live, join the community. And I also want to make sure our listeners know that, every other week, Fred is making himself available to basically do a profit power hour to kind of look at your bottom line, bring your P&L. We're going to help you identify the holes. We're going to help you establish a plan to close those holes, and we're going to hold you accountable. We'll help you set a goal, and we're going to help you hold you accountable. So if that's something you're interested in, be sure to join Restaurant Unstoppable Network. And you do not have to be a Restaurant Systems Pro customer in order for us to help you. We do have tools and services, our tools and spreadsheets that you can implement without the software that can help you today. So any final thoughts, Fred?
No, yeah, we're not gatekeeping. Our mission at Restaurant Systems Pro is to help the industry as a whole. And we know that the more people we help, that will take, obviously we're a business and we need to run that too, but our goal is to help as many people as we can.
Got it. All right. We are going to wrap up to do our Q&A, and we'll cut the recording here. See you next time.